Before we get more into what socialism is, which kind of helps inform what socialism is actually, is this essay, The Seven Left Myths of Capitalism, which is a really great way to think about uh, capitalism and kind of decouple it from the propaganda that we hear in our various media sources and things. Folks that are not that familiar with socialist history and theory and things can sometimes be taken in by these myths that on the surface sound correct and sound right. And, maybe they even touch on something that's true there, but there's a deeper analysis that we have to get into to really understand what's going on. And so, for one example, one of the myths is that greed is what's driving all this. And so it'll lead folks into kind of fake solutions where they think, well, greed is driving up the price of insulin. And also, if we just set some controls and some regulations and things like that, it'll all work out. It'll all fix. But tweaking the percentages and all these things doesn't address the fact that there's patents on these medications, for example. It doesn't address the grow or die imperative under a capitalist market. It doesn't address all of the systemic issues underneath all of this. So at best, you're only going to get some level of temporary relief. It's not actually going to address the problem in a long-term way for everybody. And, greed is one of them, but other myths include corruption, which usually gets translated into, we just need the right people, right? We just need the right business person or the right person in office or something like that, right? And again, because of all these systemic pressures, it doesn't matter a whole lot, really, who that person is in terms of the whole entire system and how all of the various parts of the market and everything work together. Sure, corruption can and does exist, but addressing corruption is, again, not going to address all of the systemic problems underneath capitalism that have to do with, again, the private property, the exploitation, the grow or die imperative, all of that stuff. If that's still underneath there working, then you haven't really solved the problem. And same goes for blaming Wall Street. Again, yes, Wall Street and monetary policy do play its role. Yes, Wall Street does take advantage of us and take our money and all. But again, just trying to make a more fair financial system, monetary policy, doesn't address the systemic things under the market and capitalism. Trying to produce more competition. A lot of times they'll say, well, it's big corporations. If we break up the banks, right? Break up the big corporations, have lots of small competition, we'll fix it. Again, that competition doesn't fix the grow or die imperative, where they have to grow. And now they have to outcompete each other to make sure that they're not winning each other or losing to each other, right? So now it's actually kind of encouraging the grow or die even more cutthroat behavior because they want to centralize power and wealth, and they have to keep growing, grow or die imperative.
Well, and when you look at think the idea that if we all went back to small business, small businesses don't have the benefit of economy of scale, so they have to get their profits again from somewhere else, whether that be exploiting their labor force or finding cheaper, lower quality materials. Just going to small business, like you said, doesn't solve any of those problems. And I obviously with any job or any employment, there's always quite a bit of variation in how you're treated and things like that. But small businesses are often no better and many times worse than big corporations and things like that when it comes to how they treat their employees and the levels of exploitation and such.
Yeah, exactly. So, these are all touching on something that does exist, but not addressing the systemic push that's going to exist regardless. So folks that, might start off thinking about greed or corruption or big corporations or something, when they kind of recognize how much the game is stacked against you, so to speak, under capitalism, just because of all those systemic pressures, unfortunately, some folks that can bring them down the path to reactionary conspiracy type things that, like, oh, it's happening this way because somebody's making it happen. There's some scary group that's pulling the strings behind the scenes and making sure that this happens. And again, it's not that never happens, but it's ignoring the systemic nature of capitalism. again, the market pressures and the grow or die imperative and things. It doesn't take a conspiracy to cause all this. It's just how human interactions work right now.
It's also, easier, kind of from the perspective of how you grasp things and how you understand these problems that we're facing. It's easy to think that there's a person, right? And don't get me wrong, there are people, right? There are people who are behind this and they need to be held accountable. But like we said, kind of in the corruption thing, you switch out the CEO of Shell's going to do damage no matter what, right? It doesn't really matter who's in that position. And the same can be said looking at, the highest office in the country is the presidency. We're seeing the damage of capitalism playing out under both of our capitalist parties, which isn't surprising, right? But it's hard and it's big when you start thinking in terms of systemic stuff, because it's not, if we remove X person, then the problem is solved. It's much bigger than that. It's much deeper than that. So a lot of times, grabbing onto that conspiracy is the path of least resistance, right? It's the easiest way to rationalize what's wrong with our society. The problem with that is if you're, and most conspiracies have an element of truth, right? That's how they get spread.
Right.
To latch onto. But when we latch onto that conspiracy, it stops us from digging deeper, and it stops us from actually addressing the foundational core problems that are causing us to be where we're at.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually, I think, a good way. The guy I mentioned in the previous slide, Peter Staudenmeier, gave a really great talk you could find on YouTube about conspiracies. And how even there's leftist conspiracies. It's not just a right-wing thing. And he said that one good way to identify a conspiracy is, does the supposed theory, or whatever you would call it, address systemic issues? Because most conspiracies don't. Capitalism is a whole social structure and system that's very complicated, very hard to understand. And when it's hard to understand, it's easy to kind of fall back to, well, it's really just this one person or this one thing. And if we just change that one thing or that one person or whatever, that's the problem, and we'll fix it all. But that's not really addressing all of the systemic nature of this, how it's part of our economy, our society, our culture, and all of our interactions between each other. There's a lot that has to change here in order to really change this mindset and culture. And that's very similar to the Take America Back, return to normalcy sort of attitude. That's another myth that we see about capitalism, that what we're experiencing today is abnormal, that it's just something went wrong and we can fix it and then we'll just be back to normal. That not only does rose-tinted glasses on history, but it again doesn't address all these systemic issues that the United States from the very beginning was designed as essentially a white supremacist capitalist project. So there was no point where we take America back or whatever. What we have to do is build something better. We have to do something different. And then finally, the final myth here is that even when folks will get to that point where they say, okay, we do have to do something different, capitalism is the problem, many folks through history have decided to kind of go it on their own and say, well, I'm going to go out into the woods in Vermont and I'm going to make a commune and I'm going to live with my commune buddies and we're going to topple capitalism. We're going to make an alternative. And those projects pretty much always fail because it's always a small group against the dominant culture of the world. We can't win against capitalism as a couple of people. We have to win as a social movement, a global social movement, a mass working class movement, various ways to describe it. That's the only way that we're going to win against this.